Imagine helping a homeless man, only to discover he's someone's long-lost father. That's exactly what happened to Emily when she showed kindness to Tom, an elderly man struggling on the streets. She never expected to uncover a heartbreaking past, a son he lost, a family he walked away from, and decades of regret weighing on his shoulders. But when Emily tracks down his son, James, what happens next will leave you speechless. Can years of pain be healed with one reunion? Watch till the end to find out. If you love these types of stories, don't forget to comment down below from where you are watching. You can support us by liking this video and subscribing to our YouTube channel. The cold Chicago air was relentless that evening, carrying with it the crisp bite of late autumn. The city streets were beginning to empty as people hurried home, wrapped in thick coats, eager to escape the dropping temperature. Streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows on the pavement, and the scent of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor mixed with the unmistakable aroma of car exhaust and city life. Emily Parker, a 32-year-old single mother of two, stepped out of the small diner where she worked, tugging her thin jacket tightly around her. It had been a long day, filled with back-to-back shifts, refilling coffee cups, and forcing smiles for tired customers. Her feet ached, and her mind was already shifting to the tasks waiting for her at home, helping her kids with their homework, packing lunches for the next day, and maybe, just maybe, sneaking in a few moments to herself before collapsing into bed. As she adjusted the strap of her worn-out purse, her eyes landed on a familiar sight, a hunched figure sitting on the weathered wooden bench near the bus stop. He had been there before. Many times. An old man, wrapped in a faded and tattered coat, his long gray beard unkempt, and his hands resting limply in his lap. His presence had become almost a fixture in Emily's routine. She saw him nearly every evening on her way home, always in the same spot, staring out at the bustling city with a faraway look in his tired blue eyes. Most people walked past him without a second glance. Some turned their heads away, pretending not to notice. A few, on rare occasions, tossed a few coins in the small, dented tin cup at his feet. Emily had done the same at first, offered some spare change, given him a nod of acknowledgement, and continued on her way. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the sharpness of the cold air, or perhaps the way the man seemed smaller, more fragile than usual. Her steps slowed as she approached the bus stop. Her conscience tugged at her heart. She could easily keep walking, go home, and forget about it. After all, she had her own problems, bills to pay, kids to care for, and a never-ending cycle of work that left her exhausted. But then she thought of her late mother's words, ones she had heard so many times growing up. Emily, kindness costs nothing, but it can mean everything to someone who has nothing. She let out a small sigh, reached into her bag, and pulled out the brown paper bag containing the leftover food she had brought home from the diner, a grilled cheese sandwich and a small cup of tomato soup. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and right now, that seemed like something worth offering. She stepped forward, hesitating for just a moment before speaking. "Excuse me, sir?" Her voice was gentle but firm enough to be heard over the wind. The old man lifted his head slightly, his blue eyes meeting hers with a hint of surprise. Up close, Emily could see the deep lines on his face, the kind that weren't just from age but from hardship. He blinked at her, as if unsure whether she was truly speaking to him. I have some extra food," she continued, holding out the bag. "Would you like it?" For a moment, he didn't say anything. His gaze flickered from the bag to her face, as if trying to gauge whether she was serious or if this was some kind of cruel joke. Then, ever so slowly, he reached out his hand, thin, trembling fingers wrapping around the bag with a quiet gratitude. "Thank you, miss," he said, his voice rough and dry, as if he hadn't spoken in hours. Emily smiled, though the sadness in his voice made her chest tighten. "It's no problem. It's warm, so eat it while you can." She was about to turn and leave, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way his hands shook as he clutched the bag, or the way his eyes lingered on her, as if he wasn't used to people stopping to talk to him. Do you have a place to stay tonight?" she asked hesitantly, unsure if she was overstepping. The old man let out a soft chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "Nowhere warm if that's what you're asking." Emily bit her lip. The thought of this man, someone's father or grandfather, sleeping on a cold bench while she went home to a warm, if slightly run-down apartment, didn't sit right with her. She quickly unwrapped the thick wool scarf from around her neck and held it out to him. "Here," she said. "It's not much, but it'll help." He hesitated again, his eyes filled with something Emily couldn't quite place. Pride, perhaps, or disbelief. "I can't take that from you, miss." "You can and you will," she said with a small smile. "I have another one at home." It was a lie, but she didn't care. After another pause, he took the scarf and wrapped it around his neck. The way his shoulders sagged slightly, as if some of the weight he carried had been lifted just a little, made Emily glad she had stopped. "What's your name?" she asked. "Tom," he answered, clearing his throat. "Just Tom." "Well, Tom," she said, "I hope tonight's a little easier for you." For the first time since she had seen him, Tom smiled. It was small, barely there, but it softened his features in a way that made him look younger, even if only for a moment. "You're a good person, miss," he said quietly. Not many stopped to help. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't feel like she was doing anything extraordinary, just something she hoped someone would do for her if she were ever in his position. She glanced at her watch. It was getting late, and she needed to get home to her kids. "Take care, Tom. I'll see you around." As she walked away, she felt the weight of the encounter settle deep in her heart. She hadn't done much, just offered a little food and warmth, but she knew kindness had a way of spreading. Maybe, just maybe, this small gesture would mean something more than she could ever understand. That night, as she tucked her children into bed, she thought about Tom sitting alone on that bench. She wished she could do more. What she didn't know was that this simple act of kindness was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change her life forever. The next morning, Emily Parker went about her usual routine, getting her kids ready for school, rushing through breakfast, and making sure she had enough energy for another long day at the diner. But something felt different. Her mind kept drifting back to Tom, the old man she had helped the night before. His tired blue eyes, the way he had hesitated before taking her scarf, and the quiet gratitude in his voice lingered with her. As she walked the kids to school, Lily, her 10-year-old daughter, noticed her silence. "Mom, you okay?" Emily snapped out of her thoughts and smiled at her. "Yeah, just thinking. About work." "Something like that," she said, not wanting to burden her children with the realities of homelessness. But deep down, she knew she wasn't just thinking. She was worrying. Tom had said he had nowhere warm to go, and the thought of him sleeping out in the freezing Chicago cold unsettled her. She had done what she could for one night, but was that really enough? As she waved goodbye to her kids at the school gates, she made up her mind. She would check on Tom again. An unexpected meeting. The day dragged on at the diner. Between refilling coffee cups and taking orders, Emily kept glancing at the clock, eager for her shift to end. When it finally did, she grabbed a to-go container and filled it with a hot meal, a generous serving of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and steamed vegetables. It was one of the diner's best meals, and she figured Tom deserved something warm and hearty. She bundled up in her coat and made her way to the bench where she had seen him the night before. But when she got there, the spot was empty. Her heart sank. Had something happened to him? Had the police forced him to move? Or worse, had the cold gotten to him? Emily glanced around, hoping to catch sight of him nearby. Her breath came out in small white clouds in the chilly air, and just as she was about to give up, she noticed a familiar figure a few blocks away, sitting against the brick wall of a convenience store. Relieved, she approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him. He was sitting with his head bowed, hands stuffed into the pockets of his coat. The scarf she had given him was wrapped tightly around his neck. "Tom?" she called gently. His head lifted, and for a moment, his eyes squinted as if struggling to recognize her. Then, a slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Miss Emily," he said, his voice raspy but warm. "Didn't expect to see you again." "I told you I'd see you around," she replied, holding up the container of food. "Hope you're hungry." His eyes widened slightly at the sight of it, and he quickly sat up straighter. "You didn't have to do that," he said, though the way he licked his lips betrayed just how hungry he really was. "I wanted to," she said simply, handing him the container. Go ahead, eat while it's still warm. Tom opened the lid, and the scent of hot food filled the air. He inhaled deeply before taking a bite of the meatloaf. A quiet hum of satisfaction escaped him as he chewed. Now this, he said between bites, is the best thing I've eaten in a long time. Emily sat on the curb beside him, watching as he ate. For a while, there was silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She waited until he had eaten most of the meal before finally asking, So, tell me about yourself. A past full of shadows. Tom hesitated, chewing slowly, as if debating whether to answer. Emily didn't push him. She knew that people who lived on the streets often carried stories too painful to share. Finally he sighed. Not much to tell, he said, though his voice carried a weight that suggested otherwise. Emily gave him a small smile. Try me. He stared down at his half-eaten meal, then cleared his throat. I wasn't always like this, you know, he admitted. Once upon a time, I had a home. A family. A life that looked a lot like anyone else's. Emily's heart squeezed. What happened? Tom let out a long breath. Lost my wife first. Cancer. She was the love of my life. When she was gone, I didn't know how to keep going. My son, James, he tried to help. But I was too stubborn. Too lost in my own grief. Pushed him away. Emily listened intently, the pain in his voice sinking into her. And then, Tom shrugged. I started drinking. It helped numb the pain, at least for a while. But one drink turned into 2, then 3, then a habit I couldn't break. I lost my job, lost my house, and worst of all, lost my son. He was still young, barely a man himself, but I left him to fend for himself. Regret lined his face as he shook his head. I haven't seen him in over 20 years. Don't even know if he'd recognize me now. Emily swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. The man sitting beside her wasn't just some nameless, homeless stranger. He was a father. A man who had loved and lost. A man who had made mistakes but clearly still carried the burden of them. He might still be looking for you, she said softly. Tom chuckled, but it was hollow. I doubt it. Why would he? I left him when he needed me most. Emily shook her head. Sometimes, we think we've burned bridges that are still standing. Tom glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Then, he sighed again. You remind me of her, you know, he said suddenly. Who? My wife, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She was kind. She always saw the good in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Just like you. Emily blinked back sudden tears. She wasn't sure what she had expected when she sat down to talk to him, but she hadn't expected this. A story of love, loss, and redemption still waiting to happen. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. You're not alone, Tom. Not really. He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw something different in his eyes. Not just sadness, but a flicker of hope. Emily knew she couldn't change his past, but maybe, just maybe, she could be part of a different future for him. As she stood to leave, she made a silent promise to herself. This wasn't the end of her kindness. It was just the beginning. Little did she know, her simple act of kindness would soon unravel a truth she never expected, one that would change both their lives forever. The days passed, and Emily found herself thinking about Tom more often than she expected. What had started as a single act of kindness, offering food and a scarf, had turned into something deeper, something personal. She found herself walking past the diner's windows during slow hours, glancing outside to see if he was there. And most evenings, she made a point to stop by his usual spot to bring him a warm meal and sit with him, listening to his stories. The more she learned about Tom, the more she realized that life had not been kind to him. But beneath the layers of hardship, loss, and regret, there was still a man who had once loved deeply, who had worked hard, and who had once had a life not so different from hers. One particularly cold evening, as the wind howled through the Chicago streets, she brought him a cup of coffee and a fresh turkey sandwich from the diner. Tom accepted it gratefully, rubbing his hands together to soak in the warmth from the cup. "You're too good to me, Emily," he said, shaking his head. "I don't deserve it." Emily frowned. "Everyone deserves kindness, Tom." He looked at her for a long moment before taking a careful sip of the coffee. "You remind me so much of my wife," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily had learned a lot about Tom's past in the past few weeks, but she had never asked him much about his son. She knew his name, James, but that was all. Tonight, something in her gut told her to ask. "Have you ever tried looking for him?" she asked hesitantly. Tom sighed, staring out into the street. "For what?" he said bitterly. "So he can tell me to my face that he hates me? That I abandoned him? I already know." Emily shook her head. "You don't know that," she said gently. "People carry hurt in different ways, but that doesn't mean they stop caring." Tom let out a dry laugh. "You think he still cares after all these years?" He shook his head, looking down at his weathered hands. "I left him, Emily. He was a kid, and I walked away because I couldn't handle my own grief. What kind of father does that?" Emily didn't have an answer, but she had a feeling in her heart that things weren't as simple as Tom believed. "Maybe he misses you," she suggested softly. Tom exhaled through his nose, shaking his head again. "Even if he did, where would I start? I got nothing. No phone, no address, no way to even know where he is. He could be in another state for all I know." Emily bit her lip, an idea forming in her mind. She didn't say anything then, but later that night, after tucking her kids into bed, she pulled out her laptop. If Tom had given her his full name, maybe, just maybe, there was a way to find James. She hesitated for a moment, questioning whether she was crossing a line. But then she remembered the look in Tom's eyes, the regret, the sorrow, the deep longing for a son he thought was lost to him forever. She typed James Harrison Chicago into the search bar, heart pounding. Pages of results popped up, but most were irrelevant. She tried narrowing it down, adding words like business, news, and family. And then, after several searches, she found something. A LinkedIn profile. James Harrison, CEO of a real estate development firm in downtown Chicago. Emily clicked on it, her breath catching. The man in the profile picture was in his late 30s, well-dressed in a suit, standing confidently in front of a modern office building. He had the same piercing blue eyes as Tom. There was no mistaking it, this was his son. Emily stared at the screen, her mind racing. James was successful, clearly well off, but there was no mention of family. No posts, no references to his father. Did he ever talk about Tom? Did he ever wonder what had happened to him? She hesitated before writing down the name of the company. Would it be wrong to reach out? What if James wanted nothing to do with his father? What if Tom wasn't ready? But then she thought about all the time that had already been lost. If there was even the smallest chance that this could lead to something, wasn't it worth trying? The next morning, she didn't tell Tom what she had done. Instead, she went to work as usual, her heart heavy with uncertainty. During her break, she stepped outside and pulled out her phone. Taking a deep breath, she dialed the number listed on the company website. A receptionist answered, her voice crisp and professional. "Harrison Development, how may I direct your call?" Emily swallowed hard. "Hi, I was wondering if I could leave a message for Mr. James Harrison. It's regarding his father." There was a pause on the other end. "May I ask who's calling?" "Just a friend," Emily said quickly. I think it's important." The receptionist hesitated, then finally said, "I can pass along a message. But Mr. Harrison is very busy, and I can't guarantee he'll respond." "I understand," Emily said, giving her number. "Just, please tell him it's important." After hanging up, she felt her stomach twist. What if he didn't call back? What if she had made a mistake? She couldn't take back what she had done now. She could only wait. That evening, she met Tom at his usual spot again. She studied his face, wondering how he would react if he knew what she had done. But he seemed the same as always, tired but grateful for her company. "You ever think about leaving the streets, Tom?" she asked after a while. He chuckled. "Every day. But it's not that simple. You can't just wake up and decide to have a home again. It takes money, resources, things I don't have." Emily nodded, her heart aching. "What if you had help?" Tom looked at her sharply. "Help from who?" She hesitated, then forced a small smile. "Just hypothetically. If someone from your past came back and offered you a second chance, would you take it? Tom's expression darkened. That's not how life works, Emily. People don't just show up after decades and make everything okay again. But what if they did? Later that night, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Her pulse spiked as she answered. Hello. Is this Emily? A deep male voice on the other end. Yes, she said cautiously. You called about my father. Her breath caught. Yes. I did. There was a long silence. Then finally, where is he? Emily's breath caught as she gripped her phone tighter, her mind racing at the weight of the moment. James Harrison. Tom's son. After all these years, after all the distance, after all the silence, he had called. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before answering. He's here in Chicago, she said softly. I see him almost every day. Another silence stretched between them, thick with emotions Emily couldn't begin to understand. When James finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more hesitant. And you're sure? You're sure it's him? Yes, she confirmed. His name is Tom Harrison. He told me about his wife, about you. He regrets everything, James. He thinks you hate him. A sharp exhale came through the line. He left, James said, his voice laced with old pain. He didn't just disappear, he walked away. I waited for him. I kept hoping he'd come back, but he never did. Emily's heart ached at the unspoken words, the years of resentment buried beneath them. I know, she said gently. And he knows that too. He's not the same man he was back then. He's lost so much. I think he's just afraid to face you. There was another pause, then a sigh. Where can I find him? The directness of the question startled her. She hadn't expected him to ask so quickly, but maybe he had been waiting for this moment longer than he realized. He stays near the diner where I work, she said. Most nights, he's on a bench near 7th and Main. James was quiet for a moment before replying, I'll be there tomorrow. Then the line went dead. Emily stared at her phone, her heart hammering. Had she done the right thing? Had she just set up a meeting that would break Tom even more? Or was this the chance for something new, something better? She barely slept that night, her mind caught between hope and fear. The next morning, she went through her routine as usual, getting the kids ready for school, heading to the diner, pretending that everything was normal. But as the day stretched on, anticipation built inside her like a rising tide. When her shift ended, she grabbed an extra meal from the kitchen and made her way to Tom's usual spot. He was there, hunched over against the cold, hands stuffed into his coat. When he saw her, he offered the familiar tired smile. Evening, Miss Emily. She sat down beside him, handing him the warm food. He took it with a grateful nod but noticed her expression. Something on your mind? Emily hesitated. Tom, if you had the chance to see James again, would you take it? He stiffened, his grip on the food tightening. Why would you ask that? Just wondering, she said carefully. What if he wanted to see you? Tom let out a heavy sigh, his gaze distant. I don't know. After all these years, after everything, I wouldn't blame him if he never wanted to look me in the eye again. Emily placed a gentle hand on his arm. What if I told you he was coming here? Tom's head snapped toward her, eyes wide, disbelief and panic flashing across his face. What? She swallowed. James. I found him. I told him about you. He wants to see you, Tom. Tom's breath came out uneven, his hands trembling slightly. No, Emily, you shouldn't have done that, he said, shaking his head. He doesn't need to see me like this. Tom, he asked about you, she insisted. He still cares, even if he doesn't want to admit it. He let out a dry, broken laugh. He doesn't care. He wants closure. He wants to see the man who left him, confirm that I'm a failure, and then walk away for good. Emily's heart clenched at his words. You don't know that. And what if you're wrong? Tom's voice was raw. What if he sees me like this and it just hurts him more? Then at least he'll know the truth, she said. At least you won't have to spend the rest of your life wondering. Tom looked away, his jaw clenched. For a long time, he said nothing. Emily didn't push. She simply sat with him, letting him process the storm of emotions swirling inside him. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw a figure approaching. Tall, well-dressed, a man who carried himself with quiet confidence. He had come. Tom followed her gaze and froze. His entire body tensed as he saw the man walking toward them. James stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable, his blue eyes, the same shade as his father's, locked onto Tom. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Tom swallowed hard. James. The name came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. James didn't move. He just stood there, taking in the sight of the man who had once been his father. "You're alive," James finally said, his voice laced with something unreadable. Tom let out a shaky breath. "Yeah." Somehow. More silence. Emily's heart pounded as she watched them, unsure of what would happen next. James finally stepped closer, his eyes scanning Tom from head to toe. "This is where you've been?" Tom nodded slowly, his shame evident. "I lost everything, son." James' jaw tightened. "You didn't just lose it. You threw it away." Tom flinched but didn't argue. "You're right." James let out a sharp breath. "Why now? Why come back into my life now?" Tom's eyes filled with regret. "I never meant to leave you like that. I was drowning in my own grief, and I didn't know how to be a father anymore. And by the time I wanted to fix it, I thought it was too late." James shook his head, frustration flickering across his face. "You don't get to decide when it's too late." Tom's eyes welled with tears. "I know." Another silence. Then James ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say right now." "You don't have to say anything," Tom said softly. I just needed to see you. To know that you're okay." James studied him for a long moment. "You're not okay though." Tom let out a dry chuckle. "No. But I'm still here." James hesitated, then finally spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you." Tom nodded, his throat bobbing. "I don't expect you to." James exhaled. Then, after a long pause, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. He held it out to Tom. "I don't know where this goes from here," he admitted. "But if you ever want to try, this is where you can find me." Tom stared at the card as if it were a lifeline, then slowly took it with trembling fingers. "Thank you." James gave a small nod before stepping back. He met Emily's gaze briefly, a silent acknowledgement of what she had done. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Tom stared after him, his expression unreadable. Emily touched his arm gently. "Are you okay?" Tom let out a breath that sounded like he had been holding it in for 20 years. "I don't know," he admitted. "But for the first time in a long time, I think I have a chance to be." Tom sat in stunned silence, staring down at the small white business card in his trembling hands. The name printed on it, James Harrison, felt almost surreal. It had been decades since he had seen his son's name anywhere but in his own thoughts, tangled with regret and guilt. And yet, here it was, real, solid proof that he had been given a second chance. A door left slightly ajar where he had believed there was only a brick wall. Emily sat beside him, watching quietly, giving him the space to process everything. "He didn't have to do that," Tom finally murmured, running his fingers over the card as if he were afraid it would disappear. "But he did," Emily said softly. "That has to mean something." Tom exhaled shakily, looking up at her with glassy eyes. "What if I mess this up, Emily? What if I try, and he realizes he was better off without me?" Emily smiled gently. "You don't know that, and you won't know unless you try." For the next few days, Tom carried the card in his pocket, touching it occasionally, flipping it over in his fingers, but never calling. Emily noticed his hesitation but didn't push. She knew this was something he had to do on his own, in his own time. Meanwhile, the cold crept in stronger, and the streets became even less forgiving. One night, as Emily handed him another meal, she hesitated. "Tom, have you thought about finding a shelter?" He sighed, shaking his head. "I've been in shelters before. They're not easy. Crowded, dangerous sometimes." Emily frowned. "Then what about something more permanent? A job?" "Maybe, James." "No, Tom cut in quickly. I'm not asking him for anything. I don't want him to think I came back into his life just to take from him. Emily softened. That's not what I meant. But you deserve a fresh start, Tom. If James left that door open, maybe it's not just for him. Maybe it's for you too. Tom stayed silent, staring out into the city as if searching for an answer in the neon glow of streetlights. That night, as Emily walked home, she made a decision. If Tom wouldn't take the first step, maybe she could help pave the way. The next morning, she made some calls, reaching out to local organizations that help the homeless find work and housing. It wasn't much, but it was something. By the end of the day, she had a lead, an old friend who managed a warehouse and was willing to offer Tom a chance. When she told him, he hesitated. A job? He echoed. I haven't worked in years, Emily. That doesn't mean you can't start again, she said encouragingly. It's part-time, just stocking shipments, but it's warm and it pays. And it's a step. Tom looked away, swallowing hard. I don't know. Why not? She pressed. Because, he clenched his jaw. Because if I start trying again and I fail, I don't think I can handle that. Emily placed a hand over his. Failure isn't falling down, Tom. It's refusing to get back up. Something shifted in his eyes then, and after a long moment, he nodded. All right, he said quietly. I'll try. The next week was the hardest he had faced in years. Waking up early, getting through each shift, pushing past the exhaustion and the doubts that screamed at him to give up. But every day he showed up, and little by little, something in him changed. His back straightened. His eyes lost some of their weariness. And one evening, as he sat on the bench waiting for Emily, he pulled out the business card from his pocket and finally dialed the number. His hands were sweaty, his heart racing. It rang twice before a voice answered. James Harrison. Tom swallowed hard. It's me. Silence. Then, a slow exhale on the other end. I was wondering when you'd call. Tom let out a shaky breath. I wanted to, but I didn't know if I should. You should, James said simply. I don't know what this means yet, Tom admitted. I don't know what you want from this. I don't either, James said. But I know I don't want to pretend you don't exist. Tom closed his eyes briefly, nodding even though James couldn't see him. I'm working now, he said after a moment. It's not much, but I'm trying. That's good, James said. Another pause. Then, cautiously, do you want to meet again? Somewhere warmer this time? Tom blinked, not expecting the offer. Yeah, I'd like that. James hesitated. Tomorrow, maybe? There's a diner on 10th Street. We can talk. Tom felt his throat tighten. The second chance. A real conversation. Okay, he whispered. Tomorrow. When he hung up, he looked at Emily, his hands shaking. He wants to see me. Emily beamed. Then you'd better not be late. The next day, Tom stood outside the diner, nerves twisting in his stomach. He was cleaner than before, thanks to a kind supervisor at the warehouse who had given him an extra uniform. It wasn't fancy, but it was something. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. James was already there, sitting at a booth near the window. For a moment, Tom hesitated, but then their eyes met, and James nodded slightly. An invitation. Tom walked over and sat down. The first few moments were quiet, filled only with the clinking of silverware and distant chatter. Then James spoke. You look better. Tom huffed a small laugh. Better than a guy sleeping on a bench, at least. James nodded, stirring his coffee. I don't know where to start, he admitted. Me neither, Tom said honestly. They sat in silence again before Tom finally said, I never stopped thinking about you. James' fingers tightened around his cup, but he didn't look away. I wanted to hate you, he admitted. For a long time I did. I don't think I do anymore. Tom swallowed the lump in his throat. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that. James studied him, and for the first time, the hardness in his eyes softened. I don't know if we can fix this overnight, he said. But maybe we can start. Tom's chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he let himself believe in hope. I'd like that. Months passed, and though things weren't perfect, they were better. Tom kept his job and eventually moved into a small apartment with the help of local outreach programs. He and James met every week, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. There were still wounds that couldn't be erased, but there was also healing. Emily watched from a distance, proud of the man who had once doubted he deserved a second chance. One evening, as she wiped down the diner counter, the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see Tom and James standing there together. "Hope you've got room for two," Tom said with a smile. Emily grinned, gesturing to a booth. "Always." As they sat down, the air between them lighter than before, she realized something. Kindness had started this journey. A single moment of compassion had rewritten a story that had seemed set in stone. And in the end, it wasn't just Tom who had been given a second chance. It was all of them. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let us know in the comments, what's the most meaningful act of kindness you've ever witnessed? Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories that touch hearts. Stay tuned for more, and we'll see you in the next one.